Should the Liberals cut ties and replace their leader, or should they bide their time?
Well, I know it's going to upset a lot of viewers who are not great fans of the Liberal leader, John Pesutto, but I do think that now is not the time to give him the boot, not the time to give him the flick. I think he needs to stay in post for some time yet, at least until the second half of the electoral cycle, because the Liberal Party in Victoria is, well, look, Peppa Pig is into jumping in muddy puddles, but if she was jumping into the Liberal Party room muddy puddle, she'd have no muddy puddle to jump into. It's so shallow in terms of depth of talent, absolutely shallow. It's got about 2 or 3 potential successors to John Pesutto. The Shadow Treasurer Brad Rosewell, the Tourism Shadow Minister Sam Groth, the former tennis player, and the Education Minister, Shadow Education Minister Jess Wilson. But all of them are young, all of them are inexperienced, all of them need a bit of political seasoning, and all of them need to prove themselves. There is no immediate successor to John Pesutto. I mean, you could, yes, as one reader of my article pointed out, he turned a paper cut into a suppurating saw with the Moira Deeming fiasco that is going to defeat the Liberal Party and therefore the Victorian Coalition in 2026 at the next state election, almost certainly as things stand. But you just don't burn off what limited talent you have. You don't throw them in at the deep end until there's actually a real chance that, one, they could actually swim rather than sink. 2, that the Liberal Party itself can develop some sound, sensible, middle of the road, and I say middle of the road, I mean centre-right policies that actually relate to the innate conservatism of the Victorian electorate. And whatever you hear about Victoria as being ultra-progressive, we're talking about a handful of seats and the Greens and Labor calling the narrative. And thirdly, nobody's actually going to be paying any attention to the electoral cycle until closer to that state election in 2026. So my feeling is, notwithstanding the Moira Deeming fiasco, notwithstanding the fact that there are writs at 20 paces all over the place, notwithstanding the fact that there's been a failure to mediate between the parties, and John Pesutto has to take responsibility for that. I just think now is not the time to dump him. I think they need to take the time to blood those new people, to season them up, give them some experience and prove that they can do it. And I think to throw them in at this stage of the piece, when it's not going to change the Liberal Party's prospects or electorate profile or electoral profile or their support in the polls, I just think is silly. But
you actually raised a really good point, as did one of your commentators, that there is a drought of successes. There is a drought, not just in Victoria, but I would go so far as to say in every state, of up-and-coming Conservatives who could take over the roles. Why is that? Is it a failure of the university clubs to recruit new spirit and new talent? Do they need to reach beyond these things? Like, why are there no new talents coming up?
Well, I think they look at particularly the Labor Party and the Greens and say, well, look, this is where the future lies. This is where the young people are going. But more to the point, at the moment, this is where the electoral cycle is in terms of success. They look at those centre-left to hard-left policies and say, oh, we can do that and do it a bit better than they can, when really they should be going to centre-right and saying, this is what we stand for. These are our values. These are actually mainstream community values. We're going to build our policies and sell them around that. They just don't have the guts, they don't have the talent, they don't have the ability, and they don't have the gumption to get out there and actually do something for themselves, pull their fingers out of their pathetic little Liberal Party asses and actually do something. I just think that in Victoria they've blown opportunities. Federally, I see signs of green shoots there with Peter Dutton, the way he's going about things, particularly in terms of being prepared to wade into unpopular debates around nuclear energy. I think that's great. But at state level, in Victoria as a case study, but looking at the other states as well, as you say, they're pathetic, absolutely pathetic. I mean, state politics usually gets the second-raters the only first-raters they tend to get are people who don't want to get on the plane and go to Canberra.
Which, that's fair
the
enough.
main game.
I would be one of those people where, not going to Canberra I consider to be a bonus.
Well, they'd be lucky to have you, Alexandra, but that's the thing. But there's a lot of hacks, there's a lot of factional players, there are a lot of time servers, and certainly in the case of the Victorian Parliament, the Liberal Party, There are extinct volcanoes who had their time but actually aren't contributing, who should just get the hell out of there and give people with some values, with some ambition, with some drive and with some common sense a chance to shine. But they won't, because they're so used to being in opposition in Victoria, and I think you could say the same as some other states. They're so used to being in the opposition that they just think like an opposition. They don't think like a potential government. They don't think of providing an alternative. They just want to actually keep their bums on the opposition benches and pull in their couple of $100K a year and swan around with all the perks of being an MP, but they don't necessarily want to actually change anything. This is the thing that really frustrates me. This is why the Liberal Party in Victoria is such a disgrace. This is why state Liberal parties around the country is such a disgrace. And I include the state Liberal government in Tasmania, which is going to the polls on the weekend, in that.